Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 47 of the Impact Co podcast. This is with Nicole Dunn, who is the Chief Operating Officer at Revio. You'll get to meet and hear Nicole shortly. It is an absolute pleasure to have you here with us as the listener community. We want to thank you for always listening and engaging with the podcast and the platform. We've recently launched the Impact Collective, which you would have heard about, and this is, part of that collective podcast that we will be continuing on for the Impact Co community. But without further ado, let me say good morning to you, Nicole. How are you doing this morning?
Yeah, hey Tafa, it's great to be here.
Fantastic. And thank you so much for being part of the pod and really taking us through your journey, which has been an inspirational journey, no doubt. I think for the listeners, just to get to know you a little bit, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where did you grow up? Where are you currently as well?
Sure. I'm based in Cape Town, which is where I was born. My parents at the time were both medical students, finalizing up their last years of study. So come from a very traditional home where entrepreneurship wasn't necessarily the norm or embraced. I was very fortunate when I was about 3 to move to the UK. My dad got an opportunity to do a bursary there to finish his specialization. And it was a really impactful diversion at a very formative age for me, where I got to see a different version of reality. And because we didn't have money in the UK, we moved around all these different council houses. I got to go to these schools where, ironically, it was a lot more diverse than the typical South Africa that I would have experienced. So a lot of the kids in my class were from places like Pakistan. And I had very diverse peers for those 2 years that we were there. And it inspired in me this questioning spirit when I came back 2 years later to go, why does this country and city look like this? This doesn't make sense. It's Africa. And so from that very young age, I've questioned the way that things are and tried to find a way to make them better for everyone.
It's fascinating how our experiences shape our perspectives, right? I think that's really fascinating, and I'm quite keen to dig into how all of this has shaped your perspective as an individual. And maybe let's get to know you a little bit more. Let's go a little bit fast forward a little bit in your journey. Tell me a little bit about your study choices, right? What led you to study what you studied? You and I studied at the same university. I also studied in Cape Town, lovely place. But yeah, quite curious to know, what led to your study choices.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit crazy that we expect people to know or to make these big decisions when you're so young. So I actually think, I would have made a great engineer and I would have loved studying engineering. And so it's great that you knew about that when you were deciding what to study, but I had no idea that engineering really even existed, or if as a girl, I would be allowed into the class. So my parents, as I say, super traditional. My mom said, go be a lawyer. You're great at arguing. You're very passionate about human rights. My dad said, you're really good at maths. Go be an actuary, get a good job. And neither of those things appealed to me at all. And
Mm.
I was just lucky, I suppose, that I'd started public speaking or debating when I was in school and ended up doing it competitively. Had the great privilege of representing South Africa and touring globally at various competitions. And a lot of the coaches were university students, and most of them had studied something called a PPE. Which was politics, philosophy, and economics. And so I kind of looked around and thought, well, these smart people that I admire and seem to end up at good jobs or interesting places once they finish studying all studied this degree. So I'm going to go out and study this degree and see what happens. And I'm
Yeah.
so grateful I made that choice, because it was a fantastic foundation, really honed my problem solving skills, gave me an interdisciplinary skill set. But it was very much not, I'm going to study this to get this type of job. It was more, here are people I admire. Let me emulate their choices, and hopefully that'll work out.
Fascinating, right? And I think it's a choice of degree that opens your horizons. Both metaphorically and in terms of your perspective, but also literally, right? You can jump to anything after that. Certainly, just listening to you speak, you definitely would have made a good engineer. So even if you still want to hop to that, you still can. I think obviously you mentioned as young people and you're someone who's had quite a rapid career progression to date. I'm quite curious, and I'm quite curious, what when you're not building or advising businesses or startups, what are you actually doing for fun? What do you do to sort of unwind or switch off?
Um, I mean, I think I'm pretty normal in that regard, right? I love hanging out with friends, having interesting conversations, meeting new people, taking advantage of Cape Town's mountains, hiking, going to the beach, and
Yeah,
traveling, of course, is something that's really special to me, getting to see more of the world and not being confined arbitrarily to the place I was born. So
yeah,
those are some of the ways I unwind, and I've had funny experiences with some of my previous colleagues who's have
yeah,
challenged me to relax. I remember my boss giving me, when I was consulting, a task for the weekend, which was go buy some jeans because you never take off your work clothes. And I was in Mozambique or Zanzibar, and I was going around interviewing mobile money agents because I was just fascinated
yeah.
by how this new financial instrument worked. So it's something I've had to practice over time, is switching off, and I'm still not great at it, but those are some of the ways I'm trying to be better.
Yeah, and look, there's few better places to switch off than Cape Town, right? I think if you really think about it, there's few better places to try and switch off. I think, for some of us who live up north, it is quite difficult to try and switch off in the hustle and bustle. You tend to always want to be busy and to always want to do something to be productive. But actually, sometimes the most productive thing you can do is actually just rest, right? And recuperate again. So thanks for giving us some of those tips of some of the things that you do as well. So let's dig into unlocking entrepreneurial potential in Africa, right? And I love your mission, which I read, on your LinkedIn page, to unlock the unrealized entrepreneurial potential in Africa. I think that's such a powerful, mission statement. That's such a powerful cause. I'd really love for you to unpack that. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think growing up in South Africa, you very quickly appreciate that opportunity isn't fairly allocated. And something that's always driven me is that ingenuity is everywhere, but that opportunity isn't. And from
Absolutely.
what I've seen traveling on the continent, that's completely true elsewhere as well. There is some amazing innovation taking place in countries all over the continent that doesn't get the same recognition or capital or
Yeah.
resources that companies in more developed markets do. And that's a real shame, because the kind of businesses that are being built on the continent are businesses that really can change lives, that can change economies. And so that is what I have chosen to dedicate my life to. I want to ensure that any entrepreneur, any individual who has an idea that is viable, that can make a positive impact on the world, that can create a commercially sustainable business, is one that can get access to the right people, the right resources, the right expertise, and to help those people themselves combat any self-limiting beliefs that maybe hold them back
Yeah.
from even stretching to realize that potential. Um, so that's really where it comes from. I think the other thing is, I had this debate when I was younger. Do you go into something like the public sector? Do you go into politics? And
Yeah.
for me, it was really intentional about looking at where I thought the most sustainable kind of growth could come from. And for me, that quite clearly became business, and more specifically entrepreneurship. So with a lot of the challenges that have happened locally, we've thought a lot about redistribution in South Africa, but we need net new growth to really excel as a country. And uh, that's where I think the government's been a little bit deficient. And so encouraging new business, new entrepreneurial ventures is really the way that we're going to be able to increase the standard of living and reduce inequality across the board.
And that impact is exponential, right? I mean, it truly is. It's not a linear, n equals out. It really, the efforts and the work that you're doing is far reaching, not only to the entrepreneur and their employees, but the entrepreneurs' families, the employees' families, their family of families. It really is. It really is something that upskills, improves people's lives in terms of how they live, how they operate on a day to day basis. So I truly do support that, in terms of trying to unlock that potential. And I think on the basis of what you've said, in that it is something that's not necessarily equally distributed, I think it's quite relevant as well. And that is the premise under which all of this is really to be formed. I'm quite curious. You obviously work with, tons of entrepreneurs, in Africa in general. What makes a good entrepreneur? So I mean, if you could boil it down to sort of three traits, what would make a good entrepreneur?
It's an interesting question because I've seen such diversity in the types of entrepreneurs, and some are subject matter experts, some are generalists, some are really academic specialists in a certain area. But if I look at the underlying traits, I think the first is curiosity, the ability to break with convention and imagine a different way of doing things, a different future, a willingness to learn new things. Resourcefulness, you're obviously in a very resource constrained environment, especially at the beginning, and being creative and being able to draw on your network or inspire other people to come along the journey with you, and finding new ways to do things in uh, a way that doesn't require a lot of capital upfront. And
Yeah,
then the third one would be decisiveness. I think the conviction, the ability to make difficult decisions and stand by them. There's no
yeah.
room for bureaucracy in an entrepreneurial venture. And you're not always going to be right as a founder, but you have to be able to make those calls and to do so quickly.
I love that, and I think that's where a lot of people sort of get hung up is in terms of not making decisions quickly enough. We talk of so many theories around that. Fail fast. If you'd rather make a decision, and if it's wrong, you learn from it, you move on. Rather than indecision, which also is a decision as well. In and of itself. I'm curious if we had to sort of reverse that question slightly, right? What do you think causes most businesses to stagnate? So most sort of startups to stagnate. What would cause that stagnation?
Look, of course, especially in some of the markets I've operated in, there is a lack of access to capital that can prohibit good businesses from growing and finding the right talent that's willing to leave a comfortable corporate job, especially with the context that people come from on the continent. It's there's no safety net, and so telling people to risk it all is really quite a profound thing to ask them to do. But if we put those constraints aside, I think first is a lack of focus, trying to do too much all at once. And, if something's not working, instead of trying to diagnose why that's not working, fix that, trying maybe another product or another market, to all at once. And that can lead to just scattered work that doesn't amount to any kind of real progress. Embracing structured experimentation to find out what customers really want is the way I think that
Yeah,
entrepreneurs can build themselves out of that kind of place. Um, Other things I've seen are, when a founding team can't let go. So this is their baby. They can't delegate and trust, and have the humility to bring in people who are maybe smarter than them or better at them than the role that they've performed in that company from the very beginning. That's dangerous, and that applies to even your standard small businesses that aren't necessarily in the tech space. And as well, weak operations, weak systems and controls. You can get to a certain level of traction without having any processes in place, any kind of structure, any kind of corporate governance. But when you're really looking to go from the 1 to 100 part of scale, those structures become really important to ensure that your growth is sustainable over time.
Absolutely. And I think those are some really key points for anybody building a business, to really look out for, to avoid, but also to try and work towards resolving some of those issues. And I think you spoke about delegation. It's quite an important thing, to be able to let go and to be able to bring in good people who can challenge you, people who can challenge your thinking, people who can take, the business to the next level. Nicole, as a final question, I want to ask you, how do you make an impact in your world?
It's an interesting question. And I think for me, I've always tried to start with my immediate sphere of influence. So, as a little girl, I really wanted to change the world. And that becomes a really big, scary thing when you grow up and you realize how much is wrong in the world. It can
Yeah, exactly.
become almost this insurmountable task. And I think a lot of people who were similar growing up become kind of disillusioned and cynical. So
Yeah,
for me, I've always tried to start with my sphere of influence. Can I be impactful in the relationships I have around me, whether that is just in an interaction with a cashier or with someone who reaches out to me on LinkedIn looking for support or advice.
yeah,
And then secondly is intentionally choosing how I spend my time and money. So I've been quite intentional about the career choices I've made to focus on becoming a valuable resource to the entrepreneurial community.
yeah,
Previously in venture capital, now as a founder, trying to do this myself and hopefully serve as a useful soundboard to other people who are looking to do the same. And as much as possible at every opportunity, lifting others up and being really authentic and honest about the challenges that we face and helping to shape the playbook about what building a business looks like in Africa and advocating for that on a global stage.
yeah. And I think, look, you are doing fantastic work, and you are really, living your mission, which is, around unlocking that potential and realizing that potential as well, right? And I think, anybody who has listened to this has been inspired and impacted, and hopefully has been educated as well in terms of what makes a good entrepreneur. I certainly have, listening to you has been quite a pleasure and a joy. And so, Nicole, I want to thank you for coming on to the Impact Co podcast. I hope you have enjoyed our chat. It flew by, actually, um, and I hope it was a fantastic experience for you as well. So, thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me, Tuffa. It's been great.
Fantastic. And to you, the listener, from Nicole and myself, we want to say thank you for once again engaging with the podcast. We want to thank you for listening in to this episode. We encourage you to subscribe, to share it with your sphere of influence. Let them also be inspired and impacted by the words from Nicole and the wonderful lessons that she shared, as well as the wonderful tips as well for all entrepreneurs across within the African sphere. So from Nicole and myself, we want to say thank you very much and goodbye.